This part of the schedule could make or break Oklahoma's 2024 season.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there tuning in, subscribing wherever they get their podcasts. Again, we're your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply over at Game Time. He's Jay Smith. Follow him on Twitter at Unfair Sports. I'm John Williams. Follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. And leading off today's show is Schedule Talk. There's been a lot of talk about Oklahoma's schedule, the gauntlet that it is. The SEC schedule makers did Oklahoma no favors, in large part due to the great success that they've had over the previous decade. It's kind of no fault of their own. So OU sits here going into the season, and you don't really have many off weeks. There's not many times that you get to kind of take a breath, and it starts at the very beginning of the season. And Josh Pate of Late Kick and 247 Sports, Jay, had this to say when talking about the make or break part of Oklahoma's schedule, saying that week 4 game against Tennessee, that's my sleeper game of the year. They've got week 4 against Tennessee. Then they go to Auburn week 5. That's their season before they ever play Texas. That 2-week stretch determines whether they're going to be a real factor in this thing, the SEC title picture, or not. Jay, what's your reaction to what Josh Pate had to say there?
And I think that's a fair point with Josh because, of course, those are the first games leading into the SEC. And that's the question. So Oklahoma SEC ready. And so, yeah, those couple of games, the first home game and the first road game of the SEC career should define what the season is going to look like. Look, Tennessee is considered one of the teams that some feel like is a sleeper going into next season, especially bringing in Nico Iamaleava at quarterback and everything that Josh Heupel has done there, right? He's had a pretty solid run over the last 3 years of being the head coach. Year 4, new quarterback, a lot of things to change. But if you really think about it, John, what can Tennessee do to prove themselves that they are here to stay, right? Like, how good of a season do they need to have? Auburn is a similar situation, which there's more to them as far as Hugh Freeze coming in because, it's been okay. And then Peyton Thorne is a decent quarterback. He's regressed in the 3 years since he had his 3,000-yard passing season at Michigan State, but they've got a lot of questions there too because they don't know who's actually going to be throwing the ball. So, really, it makes sense that those are 2 games that Josh Pate picked.
Yeah, you can't go 0-2 in those games. You have to go 1-1 at least, and preferably, obviously, you go 2-0 to start the SEC's calendar before you get to Texas. They're critical, but I think even if you were to drop one of those games, say you drop the road game to Auburn, you still have the opportunity to go and be a part of the SEC title race, be a college football playoff contender if you run the table the rest of the way. And that takes me to LSU Bama. That end of the season 2-game stretch where you host Alabama, you go on the road to Baton Rouge to play the Tigers in Tiger Stadium. To me, those are going to be playing games. If you win those games, you're in the college football playoff. You lose those games, you're probably out of it. You go 1-1 in those games, and you're probably sitting on the fence. Those are probably the 2 that I could even look at. The rest of the schedule, you don't have a 2-game stretch quite like that. Sure, you have Texas, but you have a bye week before Texas, and then you play South Carolina after that. You've got Ole Miss, but before that, you have South Carolina. After that, you have Maine. You got Missouri, but before that, you got Maine, and then you get a bye week. So there's not really another 2-game stretch. Of the 2, which do you worry more about?
No, that's a good question. I think, if anything, honestly, the logical one is, as you mentioned, the last 2 games, right? Because it's LSU at home in Death Valley, Thanksgiving weekend, last game of the season, and then Alabama coming into Norman. Those are probably the 2. But I think one underrated 2-game stretch is probably South Carolina and Ole Miss. This is the reason why I say that. You got Texas, rivalry game. You're going to be focused on that game. Right after that, you got South Carolina, which at that point probably has fired their coach. There's a good chance. And if you have an interim coach, you never want to play a team that's got an interim coach. They seem to always jump up for the coach, right? As of right now, Beamer has not lost the locker room that we know of, but we all know that the seat's getting a little warm, right? So that could be a bounce back opportunity for South Carolina, or that's where they get themselves either back on track, bounce back, or they're actually having a good season. If they're having a decent season, it's not a concern at that point. But then following that up, going to the Grove, whoo, that could be tough. So I think that's probably the underrated too. But I'm in agreement with you. It's got to be the LSU Alabama setup. So I guess with that, when it comes to Tennessee Auburn, which one of those two games in that stretch concern you the most?
At Auburn. Listen, Tennessee's good. They're going to be a good team. I like Oklahoma at home. And as much as I say at Auburn, I think it has more to do with the environment than it does with the actual football team. The football team will have talent. Again, it's SEC talent. It's going to be a top 20 roster in the country. I just don't know if their quarterback play is going to be what it needs to be in order to beat Oklahoma. I think they'll run the ball pretty well. I think their defense will be able to make some plays and keep Jackson Arnold in check a little bit, but I don't necessarily think they'll be able to do enough offensively to keep up with the Sooners. With Tennessee, it's at home. And to quote the man, Shannon Sharp, I should say, it ain't no problem. That ain't no problem for Oklahoma. When Oklahoma's at home, they're really, really difficult to beat. And I think you bring up a great point there about the Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss run of games, because you could very much have that emotional letdown coming out of the Texas game, win or lose, with South Carolina coming to town. And you could also very easily overlook South Carolina looking ahead to Ole Miss. So the coaching staff is very much going to have their hands full with this team coming out of Texas, getting ready for South Carolina, and then getting ready for Ole Miss. Like that 3-game stretch, it's underrated, but it very well could impact the success that the Oklahoma Sooners have this year.
And you made a good point about the Auburn game. If you drop that one, you still got a chance to run the table, right? And that's actually the one game I feel like could be the big stumbling block, just because it's the first road game, 80-something thousand fans. It's something different. We've talked about that before. But because it's Auburn, the weirdness of and the curseness of Jordan Hare, sure, they may throw you off, but I mean, let's be serious here. They lost to a 4-letter acronym school last year, right? And they still have the same quarterback on the roster. Not saying that should really just, end everything for them, but I think the big key thing here with them is when Hugh Freeze does a really good job of surrounding his quarterbacks with a bunch of skills position guys that can compensate for what they do. And for them, they're going to have to do a lot of compensating for Peyton Thorne, because like I said, he's okay, but he's regressed the last 2 years. So if anything, that game is one of those that is probably the kick in the butt game for Oklahoma. I think that's the game that, win or lose, it's more of a, jumpstart. Wake up, guys. You're in the conference. I don't think Tennessee's the wake-up game. I think Auburn is. And so that 2-game stretch would help. We could probably sleepwalk our way into winning the Tennessee game and then get kicked in the butt as soon as we get to Jordan Hare to wake up and say, hey, we've got a lot of games ahead of us.
Yeah, SEC fans are going to have a field day with that idea that we could sleepwalk and beat Tennessee. I think we can beat Tennessee. I'm not going to say we can sleepwalk through it. I don't think, and I think Brent Venables kind of said it right. Like, you can't sleepwalk through anything. There's not going to be any easy games. Nobody's going to give it to you. You got to go and earn it and take it. And I love the mentality of the coach. And I think that's going to spill over and marinate throughout the rest of the roster. Agreed. And they're going to work and go earn what they want this year. JD PicKell of On 3 said this unit is going to be Oklahoma's hinge point. Who are going to be the stars of that unit? We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. Are you looking for last minute tickets? Are you looking for the lowest prices? You got to go check out the Game Time app. It's available in your app store or the Google Play Store. It is an official marketplace of Major League Baseball as well. And it makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, with killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. So this weekend, which I mean, we're in for some beautiful weather. If you're getting out there to Arlington to go see the Texas Rangers, or you're going up to St. Louis to watch the Cardinals, or you're going to check out the Royals in Kansas City, go to Game Time. Get those great last minute tickets. In Oklahoma City, though, Janet Jackson is going to be at the Paycom Center this weekend. So if you want to go see a show, you want to go see somebody who Jay and I, we grew up watching, we grew up listening to her music, go check out Janet Jackson this weekend at the Paycom Center. Some great tickets available for that show this weekend in Oklahoma City. So go check out the app. Again, my favorite feature in there is that I can see exactly what I'm going to be seeing from my seat inside the app. So there's no guessing what the view is going to look like. You can do that right there inside the app. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever it is you're looking for. Game Time's got you covered. So go download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute ticket, lowest price guaranteed. Are you listening to Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? We'll make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. JD PicKell of On3 was discussing what the hinge point or the unit that might decide the season for the Oklahoma Sooners would be. And no shocker here, it's the offensive line. He had this to say: I think the number one question we've all got to ask right now is, can they protect Jackson Arnold? Because you bring in pretty much a whole new offensive line. Now, I love Bill Bedenbaugh. I think he's going to be able to get the most out of whatever unit they have out there. I trust him. But at the same time, if you can't protect Jackson Arnold in the Big 12, that's one thing. In the SEC, that's a completely other beast. This again from JD PicKell of On3. Jay, your reaction?
No, I mean, he's spot on. That's the one concern that everybody, or question that everybody's had in regards to Oklahoma, is getting that line together. When you replace five guys, there's going to be that question, right? But it sounds like there's a lot of hope out there, right? You know, Gary Hatchett is healthy, which the transfer from Washington, who was part of that Joe Moore award-winning line there and helped them, you know, get to the Natty. You got a healthy him coming in. Branson Hickman being one of the top centers in PFF as far as grades go in college football. That's always a nice addition. And then some of the young players are starting to step up. And so, you know, that's where we need to see Bedenbaugh prove everybody wrong. We always talk about Tyler Guyton for that particular reason. He brought a dude in that you didn't realize it, but you knew that he was a genetic freak. Turn that dude into a first-round pick. So I think, if anything, John, the question is, what player do you think will jump out on this line and really stand out this coming season to help make Bedenbaugh look good?
Well, I think that Branson Hickman is going to be that guy. The center position is going to be really good. And I think it's going to be better than what it was last year. Andrew Rain was an experienced player. He was solid for Oklahoma, but at times it never reached what you had hoped it would get to with a guy that had played as many snaps for Oklahoma as he had. Well, Branson Hickman comes over from SMU, a good SMU offense, a team that gave Oklahoma's defense a little bit of trouble in that game in early September or early in the season last year. So I really expect that he's going to come in here and he's going to help bring the unit together. You know, you didn't have Troy Everett for much of the offseason. You were relying on Josh Bates after Troy Everett got hurt. He's a young guy. He hasn't played a lot, so he doesn't have that experience to be able to bring everybody together on a new offensive line. Well, you've got a dude like Hickman who's done it. He's been around college football. He's been around turnover along the offensive line. He knows how to communicate both with the guys on the unit as well as with the quarterback. And that's going to be a big difference for this team, because having that experience is going to help mold everything and bring it all together. Help bring Fabechi Wiwu, help bring in whoever plays left guard, whether it's Hatchett or Heath Ozida, or if it's somehow Jacob Sexton bumping in from left tackle to left guard, whatever it is, you've got a very, very experienced player. Troy Everett, he had some experience, but he didn't have the experience that Branson Hickman has. You know, you have more than 2,000 snaps to his resume. That's going to be huge for Oklahoma. You know, I think you can go a number of different directions on this, but is there a guy that you think, Jay, that could be an impactful player? Or we look at the end of the year and you're like, man, that guy was a star.
I mean, Fabechi Wiwu was a all-conference freshman All-American, and I'm sensing he's the guy that's going to stand out the most on this line. Look, you made the perfect point. There's a lot more experience on this line than people realize. The big problem is they just haven't played together, right? From Michael Tarkin to Branson Hickman to Fabechi Wiwu, right? Gary and Hatchett, even Spencer Brown. They've all played a lot of snaps, just not together. So getting that chemistry together is what's needed. But shoot, this line went out and hung out with Lane Johnson, which is pretty dope. But they were able to not only bond, but they would try to, they learned some techniques and stuff from Lane, which, another Sooner that had something
All
to do with
pro,
our guy Bill Beatonbow.
Future Hall of Famer Sooner.
Right, exactly, right. It's like the list of offensive linemen in the league is pretty long for Oklahoma, and people still overlook what Oklahoma's been doing. It just baffles me that we ignore what Bill Beatonbow's been doing, but I digress. J.D. PicKell added a little bit more, too, in his quote from the hard count. He said this: so if Jackson Arnold struggles early in the year, make sure we evaluate the context for him. Make sure we're assessing what he's getting on that offensive line and how much time he has to deliver the ball. The fascinating thing behind that is that he's recognizing or believing that for with Oklahoma, the first couple of games is going to be critical, of course, is preparing Jackson Arnold. We both agree with that there, right? That we know that the non-conference games are going to be the tune-ups for not only the offensive line, but also Jackson Arnold getting an understanding and feel how his offensive line moves. That way he could take advantage of it and get the ball to those skills positions guys. But I think those guys are going to be a little bit more critical in his performance than people want to give credit to.
I mean, it takes 11 guys on offense for anybody to succeed.
Yep.
Football is the ultimate team sport. Quarterbacks don't carry teams unless you're Cam Newton. But even Cam Newton had great players around him as well. That was a really good team. Cam Newton just went superhuman that season. But you just don't see quarterbacks carry teams. It just doesn't happen. They've got great wide receiver play. They've got good offensive line play. It doesn't matter the level of football you're talking about. It takes 11 guys on offense to make an offense click. And I think they're going to figure it out, though. I think the offensive line is going to come together and they're going to figure it out. It's going to be good. It's not just going to be okay. It's not just going to be average. It's going to be good, because not only do you have some potential stars in Branson Hickman and Fabechi Wiwu, but you've got blue chip prospects that have been in the program developing with Bill Beatonbow and with Jerry Schmidt. And those guys are ready to break out. Jake Taylor, Jacob Sexton, two dudes ready to break out that is going to make the difference on this team. It's not just going to be the transfer portal guys with that experience showing out and showing who they are. I mean, remember this time a year ago, Tyler Guyton had one start under his belt.
Yeah.
And then he went and became a first-round offensive tackle. So anything that we need to worry about, we just need to hand it over to Bill Beatonbow. Cast your cares upon Bill Beatonbow, because he
place
is
the burden on his shoulders.
That's right, because he has done enough. He's developed enough dudes to be worthy of the trust. And we're going to talk about it. One of those guys coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. So we've talked about the guys that we think are going to be stars for this team: Branson Hickman, Fabechi Wiwu. We do think they'll break out. They'll have big time years. Jacob Sexton, he's gotten a ton of positive pub over the last 7-8 months, played really well in the bowl game. But it's Jake Taylor that I think people have kind of been up and down on this offseason. I've heard things of like the talent is there, mentally just needs to put it together. Brandon Drum of OU Insider had a nice little update on where Oklahoma's offensive line was and had a note from somebody inside the building. He said, Jake Taylor has really taken a huge leap from where he's been at. He is going to be heavily counted on, and whoever plays the other offensive tackle spot opposite of Sexton could be the make or break spot for the offensive line this year. I mean, so one, Jacob Sexton is going to be your left tackle. And to me, it sounds like Jake Taylor is on track to be your right tackle this year.
That's kind of what I've been saying for a while, right? When I looked at the line, I was thinking it was going to be the Jake and Jake show when it comes to your bookends. And honestly, that the tackles can be a little bit more committee. Throw in some Michael Tarkin in there, throw in a little bit of Spencer Brown, get that rotation going. But because I think the interior is where it's going to be the tightest, right? You got the Hickman, you got Fabichi Wewu, you got Uzeta as well as Gary and Hatchett, and you can rotate around in that. But I think those tackles is where you're going to have a committee. But yeah, I think Jake Taylor, he's making this huge leap, as which OU Insider is reporting. I think 90% of your concerns are gone, because I think that's really where everybody was asking questions. And fun fact, though, we talking about Cam Newton a minute ago. You know that in that season when they won a national championship, he did not throw for 3,000 yards. That is amazing to me that Auburn just refuses to get to 3,000 yards. But I digress.
They hate throwing the football, Jay.
They hate it. The forward pass, as Bobby Bowden would say, the thing that changed the game for him as a coach and why he probably need to make him retire was the forward pass. And that's not something you want to hear from a coach in an era where the pass was going forward for a long time. But anyway, I think Jake Taylor, the Jake and Jake show, is going to be a huge deal next season. Those two guys they're going to be what makes or break the line. I don't think it'll be anything on the interior. It's going to be those that left and that right tackle. And I think that they can live up to it. Hence why Drum pointed out in the tweet that no one around the program has concerns. I think Bill Beaton both sees that they've got that.
I mean, because again, he was a 4-star prospect coming out of high school. You know, he already had great size when he committed to OU. You know, this was a kid that had big time offers from around the country. And I mean, it was Oklahoma that was able to land him, but I mean, he was being pursued in Alabama, you know, that were in his final three. You know, you had Florida State, Colorado, Michigan, Miami, USC, Penn State, Ole Miss, Nebraska, Missouri. The list goes on and on. Like, this is a dude that has a really good foundation. It's just needed time and it needs to develop. You know, if you've heard me say it once, you've heard me say it 1,000 times. Everybody's developmental timeline is different. You know, a guy like Anton Harrison can come in as a true freshman and be a starter at offensive tackle. A guy like Caden Green could come in and be a starter right away, but that's not the case for everybody. And that doesn't mean that they're lesser of players. It just means that they have stuff that they've got to work on to be able to be trusted on the field. Now we're starting to get to the point where Jacob Sexton, Jake Taylor, those are guys that are ready to take the step and ready to take the leap. Again, the foundation is there. The talent is there. It's just a matter of now getting on the field, putting the talent to use, getting that experience that can inform your talent, and then just taking off from there.
Yeah, especially with the weight that he's put on. He's well over 300 pounds out there at the tackle spot. And so with him putting on good weight and good strength, yeah, it's that report coming out is probably something around that, right? The summer workouts, they're probably seeing him really put in work in the weight room. And that's where a lot of that confidence comes from, which makes sense. That's where you should feel confident. If you're seeing your guys in the weight room moving weight around and still having the ability to move, be agile, and be able to shift around, absolutely. That's the thing that's going to jump out the most once we hit the field. We just need to see the dudes protect somebody. And we're going to probably see that going into, game one against Temple. And then I'm thinking probably the Houston game is going to be the one that really tells us what the offensive line is, especially with Houston being in the Big 12. There's still a possibility that they've got some talent that they've snatched up from somewhere, right? So, and then of course bringing in the new head coach that came from Tulane, who's really good at coaching. That's going to be the big one. What game do you feel like is the one that's going to really be definitive for this offensive line, and tell us what they are?
To me, it's Tennessee. If you can hold James Pierce Jr. in check a little bit, I mean, he might get his. You're not going to stop a guy like him from completely disrupting your offensive flow. But if you can contain him a little bit and just not let him wreak havoc every single down, you can win some of your 3rd and long situations and keep him from getting to Jackson Arnold. I'll feel much better about it, because they're going to test Jake Taylor on that right side of the offensive line. They're going to put him over there and they're going to make him win that matchup. And if Oklahoma is not having to provide extra help in order to win that matchup with a running back chipping or a tight end providing, that double team over there, then I'll feel much better about where they're heading, because he's a first team all SEC selection and a guy that's on his way to becoming a first round NFL draft pick. So if Jake Taylor can hold his own, again, he's not going to win every battle. He's not going to win every snap, but if he can at least neutralize him, go 50-50, and win at least half those snaps, man, you'll feel great about where you're headed, because you may not face a pass rusher as good as him until you get to Harold Perkins at the end of the season. Oof. At which point you'll have had 11 games worth of reps and snaps to get you ready for that point. So if we're feeling good that first week of SEC play, man, I'll be feeling great the rest of the year. It's going to take time and it's going to take development, but you get a really, really good test right out of the gate.
Yeah, it makes me a little nervous, him coming off on that against our right tackle on that left side, right? We all know James Pierce is going to do all kinds of. He's going to do some massive things out there for Tennessee. Kind of terrifying at the same time.
Well, and it's up to Seth Luttrell to scheme for that too.
Yes.
Get the ball out of Jackson Arnold's hands quick. Use some, naked bootlegs to catch James Pierce coming, crashing down the line of scrimmage and getting Arnold free and being able to throw on the run. Like, it's up to him to take some of the pressure off of Jake Taylor and off of Jackson Arnold when they're facing him. And you can do that. You can schematically do that to help your quarterback and your offensive line.
Yeah. I'm wondering how many GT counters you're going to be able to run to that side of the field.
And sometimes they say you run at them. If you like a guy like Micah Parsons, the NFL has figured out you run at Micah Parsons. You don't run away from Micah Parsons because he's too fast. He's too athletic. He'll chase you down from behind. Yep. But if you run at him, you're going to have a much better success rate. So maybe you crash down for Bet You Wee Woo on James Pierce a bunch of times in that first half, and it takes a little bit of the juice out of him. So when you're dropping back to pass in 3rd and long situations, he might not have the same energy and explosiveness.
Yeah, the question is what is this motor going to look like once we get to that point? And that makes sense. I can see Tennessee being a measuring stick. I think the gelling process between Temple and Tulane, those 3 weeks are going to be so critical as to figuring out exactly who's ready to play. And I have like I said, the concerns for us, there's no reason to have one. You got Bill Beatonbow, right? He's been a proven guys for years. I had a couple conversations with some SEC guys, and that was the main thing they talked about was, okay, offensive line, what's going on with that? And I'm like, look, if we didn't have Bill Beatonbow, I'd be nervous about this offensive line. At that point, I would have concerns. I just have the questions, right? It's just him doing what he does best, redoing an offensive line once again. And the good thing is we're young, and you talked about this, right? When you go back to the Heath Zetas, the Logan Howlands, the Joshua Bates, the big thing is there's a bunch of young players that they're pulling from these new classes, from the Brent Venables era classes, that now they're trying to get up to speed. Luckily, they had some veterans on the line and brought in some veterans from the portal like McKay Matower as well as Walter Rouse. Now the thing is molding the young players that they really wanted as young players so they can build it from the ground up. Now we got to see how effective they're going to be. If you look at that, which young player do you think is going to eventually jump out?
Man, I have a hard time, picking between a couple friends of the show and Heath Ozida and Josh Bates. Those are two guys that I think both at some point will start for Oklahoma and be stars for Oklahoma. I think it's going to come. May not be this year because, again, Branson Hickman at center and then, Hatchett at left guard. You've got some veteran options that give you a really, really solid floor. But for a guy like Heath Ozida, it could very well be this year. He could very well push for a starting role this year. We'll see. I think the floor is solid for Oklahoma's offensive line. And at that point, you're looking at, okay, the potential, the ceiling. I mean, the ceiling is high because you've got blue chippers and you've got talented veterans that have come in. I think they can be really, really good and not just okay.
It's the ceiling is high with these linemen, which is the biggest plus in the conversation. And so, yeah, I think that Ozida gets in there and starts at left guard still. I think that they kind of preserve a little bit of hatchet and you just let Ozida go out there and let him prove himself. And I think he does it. He looks good. Latest set of pictures. Looks a little strong. I'd go with it.
He's a hungry kid. He's quietly confident and hungry, and he's going to go out there and he's going to prove what he can do on the field. He's not going to just sit there and talk about it. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So go over there, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram at Locked On Sooners. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports, myself at John 9 Williams. And go check out the new Locked On Sooners Insider program by texting SEC 2024 to 405-817-6711. You can get 25% off your first month. Again, for the Locked On Sooners Insider program, we're going to take your questions and we're going to answer them here on the show through the Locked On Sooners Insider program. So again, subscribe by texting SEC 2024 to 405-817-6711. But until next time, he's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams. Boomer.
Sooner.